Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic book fans from all over this big blue globe that we call home. This is Chuck Dixon, your sage of the comic book page, and I'm here once again to answer your questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Hey, have you checked out spinrack.io at Discord? It's a growing community. We got people posting artwork and sharing ideas and stories and everything else. It's becoming quite the close-knit group. And Graham Nolan and I are there overseeing it and adding our own advice and tutelage to any wannabe comic book creators or just comic book fans curious about the creative process of making this medium that we all love so much. So check it out, Discord at spinrack.io. First question, Ian Potash. What are your thoughts on Joel Schumacher being the only Batman director that was an avid reader of the comics as a kid? A lot of people liken his work to the 60s TV series, which is no coincidence, since both him and the showrunners of that show were inspired by the same Silver Age Batman stories. Yeah, every interview I read with Schumacher, he talks about his therapy more than his projects, or did. I don't think Joel Schumacher is with us anymore. Yeah, obviously he wanted to camp it up. He leaned into the worst aspects of the 1966 show, which were silliness, which worked for the 1966 show because that was a very nuanced production. It was created so that kids would like it and adults would enjoy it from a satirical or parody standpoint. You know, it was very tongue-in-cheek. There's not a lot of tongue-in-cheek about Schumacher. His stuff is outrageously drag show campy, just in your face, defying you to take it seriously. And I don't, he may have read the comics. I don't think he understood what he was reading. And I don't think he had a whole lot of affection for them. He didn't think a lot about them. What audiences wanted, and audiences continue to want, and I think audiences have been denied, is a straight-up Batman thriller. A really good crime story, a really good action story with Batman in it, rather than one movie after another about Batman. And the thing is, that's what the TV show delivered each week. We weren't treated to a retelling of Batman's origin continuously. We weren't, the stories in the Batman TV series were not about Batman. They were setups in which Batman could be challenged and ultimately triumph. The feature of each of the Batman stories was the villain and his crime. What was the villain doing? What was the gimmick? What was the heist? What was the score? And then Batman and Robin are, brought on the scene to thwart the bad guy. And that's something missing from most of the Batman movies, is a clear motivation for the bad guys. Other than the second Nolan film, the one featuring the Joker, none of these Batman movies feel like Batman stories to me. And I think that's where Schumacher fell down. It was all about glitz and camp and showing off, and blowing enormous budgets rather than telling us a good, compelling story. Eber Perry. Would you talk about the Joker Devil's Advocate? Did the idea originate with you or editorial? Was it always planned as a graphic novel, or could it have run in detective? Was Graham Nolan the only artist considered? Graham Nolan was not only the only artist considered, but, if he co-plotted it with me, and very much was part of the creative process from the beginning, to the point where he and I, met in person in New York. We spent a couple of days in New York plotting this one out. And because it is, if you've read it, it's a rather complex whodunit. And, I needed help. I needed someone to bounce it off of. Now, whose idea was it? It was Graham and my idea. We came up with it together. We wanted to do initially a reaction to The Killing Joke, a story we both loathe, much the same way that John Wayne and Howard Hawks made Rio Bravo as an answer to High Noon, a movie they loathed. Graham and I, we don't like Killing Joke, so we wanted to do our own version of what we felt was the ultimate Joker story, and a Joker story that would answer the question, about Batman's moral compass where it comes to the Joker. Often you hear discussions, why doesn't Batman just kill the Joker? It's an excellent question. I've dealt with it before, so I'm not going to deal with it again. But in this story, Joker is accused of a capital crime, a death penalty crime that Batman knows he did not commit. And while everyone says, well, look, just stand back and let justice take its course. Yes, the Joker didn't commit these murders, but he's committed so many others. It's time for him to pay. But Batman cannot countenance this. He cannot stand by, because allowing the Joker to go to the electric chair for a crime he did not commit would mean that somebody got away with the crime. And since Batman always deals through the law, he doesn't punish people on his own. He merely captures criminals and hands them over to the justice system. He follows those rules. Once someone was convicted and executed for that crime, there was very little Batman could do to find the real killers. So you see his dilemma, and over the course of the graphic novel, hopefully Graham and I have convinced you that Batman is doing the right thing. Batman is adhering to the rule of law, unlike so many of our leaders in this country do today, where the rule of law seems to be passé. But yeah, it was very much driven by us. We did not want it to be just an arc in Detective Comics. We wanted it to be something special. We wanted to make a statement. This is our statement concerning Batman and the Joker and their relationship, their eternal struggle with one another. I don't think we had goals that lofty. We just wanted to stick a thumb in the eye of The Killing Joke. But unfortunately for us, The Killing Joke was looked upon as, sacrosanct in the DC offices. It was seen as a colossus, a milestone. And so not a whole lot of effort was made to market this book. In fact, this book only happened because DC did Graham and I dirty on something. They made a deal without asking us that we really should have had a say in. And I wasn't about to let it go. So I said, look, Graham and I will go along with this, but there's certain things we want, and there were certain things I wanted. And I made up a list of projects that I wanted to do that the Batman offices had to greenlight in order for me to go along with what they had done, what DC Comics had done. And because Denny O'Neil and his gang of assistant editors were men of honor, they kept their promise. And I got to do every single project on that list. And at the top of the list was the Joker Devil's Advocate, done by Graham and I. Other things on that list were Batman Predator 3 with Rodolfo DiMaggio. He was always part of it. There were a number of other projects on that list, and they honored it. And I got to do all of them. And of course, all of them made money for DC. The Joker Devil's Advocate could make a whole lot more money for DC if they'd ever reprint it and publicize it and put it out there. Not to spin my own propeller, but Graham and I and our work on Batman only becomes more and more fondly remembered as the years go by, and it seems like kind of silly to let a project of this high concept and this kind of done in one story to just lay on a shelf somewhere. They really should get it out there. Maybe an email campaign. The DC no, it won't work. They don't change their mind about anything. Okay. Oh, wow. Eber, you get a twin spin. As DC's listed compendium editions of Robin and Nightwing, it got me thinking, do you prefer to see your work reprinted in any particular format from an aesthetic point of view? Yeah, I'm a hardback kind of guy. I like hardbacks. The Compendium series is weird. I didn't know they were doing Robin. I'll have to look that up. Compendium series from DC is weird. It's a $60 paperback, and they're generally over 1,000 pages. And everybody knows that 1,000-page paperback there's no way to avoid wear on that. That spine is going to wear, it's going to crack, it's going to break. It's not a very sturdy format, especially for $60. They'll probably sell a bunch, and people have assured me that they'll sell a whole bunch because they're cheaper than the omnibuses. But they're not that much cheaper than the omnibuses. Personally, I'd spend the extra $40 or so to get something more lasting, something easier to read, something that falls open easier than one of these big, thick telephone book trade paperbacks, which I find kind of disappointing. So, it's nice they're collecting it, but seriously, I've seen omnibuses of Nightwing runs that came after what Scott McDaniel and I did, and I know for a fact they didn't sell anywhere near what Scott McDaniel and I did. So why do they get an omnibus and we get a cheaper edition? It's just asking. From a business point of view, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But then so much of what DC Comics does from a business point of view makes absolutely no sense, as I will get into in more detail later on in this video. Roberto Dungato, why do you think some writers completely disregard previous characterizations of characters, regardless of whether they were principal, say Batman, Bruce Wayne, or secondary, Jimmy Olsen, Harvey Bullock? Do you think it is to pick a bone with the character's creator, or rather a teenage-like rebellion against what was established, or just plain laziness? I put it down to laziness and narcissism. Laziness in that when I would be assigned a character to write, or asked to write a character, even if it's a character that I'd read for years and felt very conversant with and very familiar with, someone like Batman or Green Arrow or Conan or the Punisher. Well, I'm switching from reader to writer now, so I've got to look at the character in a different way. I got to think harder about this character, because I'm going to be creating new adventures. I'm not going to be recalling stuff I've read. I've got to create new stuff with this character, which requires a deeper exploration from my own point of view of what that character is. Now that's not to say that my own point of view will intercede in the work. It's just I have to reach my own personal understanding of this character, and then present them in a way that the reader expects them to be presented. Present them on model, inside the template that everybody's used to, paying a lot of attention to continuity and all the rest of it, and then try to exceed the reader's expectations within that framework, but not violating. And it's easy to just take a character and deconstruct them, or destroy them, or do a fish out of water story with them. That's easy. Writing a compelling escapist fiction featuring that character in their classic form without violating it, it takes a little lifting. It takes some thought. It takes some contemplation. It takes an understanding of, which is why I really only generally take on characters I really like, or I appreciate, because I don't want to have to learn to like the character. But yeah, it's narcissism and laziness. It's thinking I can do this better. I can phone this in. It'll be just fine. It's Batman. It's like pizza. How do you ruin it? Well, you can ruin pizza. We all know that. We've all had Papa John's at one point in our lives when we were desperate and there was no other choice. So it's I guess it's laziness, narcissism, and a level of contempt for what they're writing. Like, this is good enough for them. And the narcissism part is writers who think, I'm going to make my mark on this character. And this character's been around forever, and now I'm going to make my mark. I'm going to have, Batman wet his pants, and that'll make me famous. Everybody will be talking about it. Yeah, everybody will be talking about it, but not in the way you thought. You made a chump of yourself having Batman wet his pants. This is idiotic. It's not what anybody wants to read. It's like I said, nobody wants to read a stupid Batman or a stupid Superman story or a stupid Spider-Man story where they're idiots or they have flaws. These are characters that are, paragons. They are ideals. And they have to remain that way. But that doesn't mean they can't be interesting in their own right if you have a deep understanding of who they are, if you have an understanding of the nuances of the character and can bring them out to a readership that already loves them. So how hard can that be? Just give the readers what they want, and then your job is to give them more than they expected. It seems pretty simple to me, but that's the work of writing. It's not just thinking things up and putting them on the page. It's thinking about the audience, what they expect, what's come before, the creators who came before you, and anybody who writes with contempt for the creator of the character they're writing, they need to find another job. Go work for UPS or something, because you don't belong in comics if you don't have any respect for the people who built the house that you're, roaming around in. Travis, Mr. Dixon, have you intentionally written a silent comic before? Well, one was in a Young Justice 80-page giant, which was the setup was it was an anthology thing, I guess so they could get it done on time. So they had a whole bunch of different writers and artists doing short stories, and they were all they all happened in the imagination of the Red Tornado. That was the setup. So you're pretty much free to write whatever you wanted. It was this carte blanche, just make something up. And so I took the opportunity to tell a story as if it was a silent movie. And it's Wonder Girl and Arrowette trapped in this universe, out of a German expressionistic silent film. And it was all done in 6-panel grids. As you can see, it was done in monotones. And then it had the dialogue captions and things like that. And it was a lot of fun. And Ryan Sook got into it. He makes it look like a distressed film. It's only been partially restored. So it was a lot of fun to work on. So it was, yes, that was an intentionally silent story. Another one I did was in Airboy 51. There's a Heap backup by Frank Fosco that is wordless. And Frank is such an awesome visual storyteller. In your original question, you mentioned that you had seen a misprinting of Avalon, the superhero book that Frank and I did for Arctoons. And somehow you saw an edition that had mistakenly had the words left on it and remarked on how the story was clear even without the words. Well, that's all about Frank. Frank's so good at cinematic storytelling. And when the opportunity came to do a Heap backup as a stretch goal on Airboy 51, I turned to Frank immediately because I thought he would do a dynamite job, and he did. He did. Just terrific work. I think I did a silent story for Batman Chronicles, but I can't remember. It either featured Killer Croc or Harold, the assistant tech maintenance guy that used to live in the Batcave back in the 90s. But and possibly I've done other silent stories. I just can't recall them right now. So any Chuck Dixon fans out there who know my bibliography backwards and forwards, maybe you can suggest other stories I did that were wordless. Martin Acosta, I was watching your Ask Chuck Dixon 156, and at the end of your recounting of your argument with James Earl Jones, I was left wondering what would be, in Chuck's eye, the 3 most unusual things he has signed on for a fan. So if you don't mind, what are in your eyes the 3 most unusual things you've signed on for a fan? I can't. The weirdest thing I ever signed was I signed somebody held their baby up, and I signed the diaper. They wanted their diaper signed, and that makes no sense on the face of it. I was signing what is made to be hopefully a disposable item. One would really pray that was not considered a collectible, and is maybe in a lucite block now. I don't know how you would preserve. CGC could not preserve that. They would not know what to do. Other things I can't think of. I mean, I've signed arms. People don't have anything to sign. I really can't think of anything that unusual. But I've signed action figures. I've signed lots of comics I didn't work on because, as I've explained in videos past, I no longer try to explain to people I didn't work on this, because 100% of the time they don't care. They just want your signature on it, whether you wrote it or Mark Waid wrote it or Chris Claremont wrote it. They just want your signature on it. So I don't even argue or explain anymore. If it's put in front of me, I sign it. So, but yeah, I can't think of anything. The diaper is the weirdest. Now, as far as con experiences go, I was at a little convention in Delaware one day, one of those one-day shows with my buddy Flint Henry, and a guy showed up who turned out to be Flint's scary fan. This guy's really scary. But we didn't know that at first. He seemed affable at first, as so many psychopaths do. Ted Bundy was reportedly a really nice guy until he started stabbing you. But the guy said he was like this huge Grimjack fan. Oh, I was a big fan. And it's like, you hear that a lot. Like, I'm a big fan. And we're like, yeah, okay, that's great. But this guy had to prove it. And he strips off his shirt, turns around, and he has over his entire back a Grimjack, reproduced Grimjack, like from the waist up, much like this drawing, done by Flint. Basically, the tattoo artist copied Flint. If you know anything about Flint's work, man, it is noodly. Flint throws in the detail. And this was like this highly detailed Grimjack drawing that covered the guy's entire back. It must have cost like $2,000 in I don't know what tattoos cost. This one must have cost a fortune. And we were both taken aback because, first of all, it was impressive. And secondly, it was kind of frightening that someone would, be this dedicated to anything, to have their entire back covered by it. And I remember saying to Flint, I said, look at that. Every line you drew was painful for this guy. And I think Flint responded, yeah, it was painful for me too. The ever self-effacing Flint Henry. But that's one of the weirdest. It's not a signing thing or anything else, but your question recalled the story to me. I can't imagine having anything by Flint permanently etched on my skin. It must have taken days. David Mason. You have worked with some of my favorite artists in the 90s, Scott McDaniel, Tom Grummett, and Tom Lyle. Norm Brayfogle has always been one of my favorite Batman artists. Would you mind sharing your experience working with him as an artist? Did you both work on another issue together that I'm not aware of? What did you think of his visual style? Norm is a very private guy. He was like into meditation. He was a very serious guy. Not unfriendly, just, you could tell this guy was serious. Like, he was like an old soul for a young guy. And, I worked with him on that one issue with Detective. He kind of bridged the gap between my regular Detective artist and then when Graham came on, Detective. And obviously I loved working with him. This period leading up to Nightfall, leading up to me being hired on Detective, is one of my favorite runs of Batman. Alan Grant and Norm Brayfogle were just killing it on Batman, just doing terrific work. And you're right, Norm's work on Batman was a game changer because he kind of loosened the character's physicality up. So he wasn't always as, brooding and crouching in shadows and stuff like that. Norm was really, really good at drawing Batman in action. And his own interpretation of the villains and various ancillary characters and Gotham City itself, while being uniquely his, fit perfectly into the Batman universe that had come before. So yeah, I liked working with him. I didn't have a lot of interaction with him. He came to one Bat Summit, so I did get to meet him and spend some time talking to him. But he was kind of he was Alan's guy. You become alive with an artist. Like Graham and I were a team. Alan and he were very much a team. And so at that summit, he spent a lot of time talking and communing with Alan as opposed to the rest of us. But and like I said, kind of a private guy. There was a lot of internal stuff going on there in his head and stuff like that. And as I said, not unfriendly and not aloof. Just you could tell this guy's mind was always going. But yeah, I mean, his contribution to the Batman of the '90s it's inestimable because he and Alan they were holding the Batman flag high for all those years working as a team. Chris W. What is your general opinion of kid sidekicks? I got into comics in the early 80s, and one of the things that turned me off to DC Comics at the time were the kid sidekicks all over the place. Marvel generally avoids the kid sidekick, but DC loves them. What's your opinion on these types of characters? Well, I mean, in some cases they're kind of necessary. Marvel eschews sidekicks now, but in the past, all of their heroes had sidekicks. Submariner, Human Torch, and famously Captain America. But I can't kick about sidekicks because I made a lot of money writing sidekicks. Like I came into DC Comics writing a sidekick character and kind of built my reputation. Writing various kinds of Batman sidekicks from Robin to Nightwing to Batgirl and the rest. And I had my favorite sidekicks growing up. Kato. I got to write Green Hornet for a little while, which was cool. I thought Kato was like the coolest sidekick ever. I didn't have a problem with sidekicks per se, and obviously as a writer, they're a good thing because it gives your hero someone to talk to. I mean, if Punisher never talked to Microchip, we wouldn't know a whole lot about the Punisher. Stories, unfortunately, need exposition so that the reader understands what the hell's going on. And unless you're going to have a caption-heavy story, you want to give them someone to talk to and relate to. And also the sidekick thing, that relationship, Modesty and Willie, Batman and Robin, Green Hornet and Kato, that becomes like a cool relationship, like a Three Musketeers, one for all and all for one kind of thing. The friendship, the loyalty, the Semper Fidelis between these two heroic characters is a cool thing. I mean, it's at the bottom of, every Western hero in the 30s and 40s had a comedy relief sidekick who was his loyal companion, his partner. The buddy cop film, all these things. There's an appeal there of this, bromance between two heroic figures. Now, at Marvel, like I said, they used to have sidekicks, then they eschewed them entirely, and sort of made it, brought forward the question of the kid sidekick right in your face with, the death of Bucky and Captain America's grieving over Bucky's death and all the rest of it, and that's what was going on when I was a kid. And it was wow, this is, to me as a kid, I'm like, this is kind of adult, looking at the idea of, I took on this teenager to help me fight, Nazis, and he died because of it. I shouldn't have done that. And Cap with all the guilt and everything else. And you began, as a kid thinking, well, geez, I wonder what if Batman would go through this same process if Robin were to die. And so yeah, I mean, Marvel, the sidekick was kind of treated as a tragic figure. And even though I tried to introduce a sidekick for Moon Knight, Midnight, it didn't catch on. But it gave me some story grist for a while. But the character never caught on. But it was kind of practice for me writing a hero and sidekick situation, because they kept, they always, I guess fans always tout Moon Knight as Marvel's Batman, and I wanted to show the fallacy in that, where he takes on a sidekick who is reluctantly takes on a sidekick, doesn't really want one. And of course, I've also explored the sidekick aspect with Tad Ryerstad, the would-be Nightwing imitator in Nightwing, where Tad is, he's a sicko. He's a psycho. He's dangerous, but he sees himself as a hero, and he definitely wants to be Nightwing. Much the way I think all of these sidekicks want to be the guy that they're going to assist. Most Robins, except Tim Drake in my mind, most Robins want to eventually be Batman. And I assume Bucky eventually wanted to be Captain America. He would be next in line. And Tad Ryerstad wanted to be that for Dick Grayson in Bloodhaven. But of course, that was never to be, because Tad's moral compass was broken. He's a hateful little creep. I've also explored the idea of the sidekick gone wrong in my series Shade at Arctoons, which you can read for free in its entirety at Arctoons. It's called Shade, and he rejects a volunteer sidekick who shows up in the form of a character called Van Brace, and he goes so far as to knock him out, lock him in a cargo container, and ship him off to Thailand. That's how much Shade does not want a sidekick. And of course, the sidekick has hard feelings about that, which cause complications for Shade later in the story. So, because Van Brace's experiences in Asia were not pleasant, and he's kind of sore about it. Hey, Chris W. gets a twin spin. Okay, what is your general opinion on alternate versions of existing superheroes? I'm talking about your Superman family, your Batman family, and these days the proliferation of spider people at Marvel. Do they make the world of comic books better or worse? I think it's generally, the more you grow these families, particularly on the Batman side, because Batman's sort of had a population explosion of ancillary characters in recent years. Kind of takes away from the loner aspect, the solitary man, the rugged individual. It's hard to be a rugged individual when the Batcave's, crowded with, a bunch of family members and friends. So I think it kind of takes away, kind of dilutes the character. But DC's never gone as far as Marvel with all these different variations of Spider-Man, which to me, just each one of them takes a little something away from Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Are you going to create a Spider-Man for everybody? Apparently there is a Spider-Man who's wheelchair bound. Is there a Spider-Man who collects stamps? Is there a Spider-Man with, I don't know. I mean, it's like is there a Spider-Man for everybody? Is there a Spider-Man? Is there a vegan Spider-Man? Probably. It's a little odd to niche market your signature character of your company in this way. And I really think it takes away from the whole. So here's a segment. I don't know if I think I've visited this before, but pet peeves. Little something off the cuff. I can't rely on all of you to come up with subjects for this little channel. So I'm gonna do a series of these things, little things that bother me. We all have little things that bother us. Once upon a time, you would go to the magazine stand, there would be magazines, and then if you were into fashion or yachting or collecting model trains or, whatever it was you were into, there'd be a magazine for you, in addition to news magazines and, pictorial magazines and all the rest. And if you've been by a magazine stand recently, you've seen it's all changed. It all seems to be these special issues about, pop icons, things that are already popular, that maybe you might want to read a little bit more about. And these are like extra thick special volumes from the different magazine publishers. And they read like a shallow dive on a Google search, or maybe a Wikipedia entry with more pictures and just to print it on paper. That's what they come across as. And I understand the marketing. It's a shame that regular magazines are failing the way they are. But of course, a lot of that is the magazine publisher's fault for not understanding the audience and trying to run a political agenda. I mean, if you've ever looked at like a teen girls magazine recently, it's unrecognizable. Karl Marx seems to inspire more of the articles than, the latest fan fave teen girl crush. But the marketing behind these, I remember back at Eclipse Comics when Dean Mulaney told me that whenever they put Marilyn Monroe or Elvis on a comic book cover, it sold more. He said, because there are people who will buy anything with Marilyn Monroe or Elvis on it. And I understood that. In the 70s, back when I was still a Star Wars fan, I would pick up any magazine that had Star Wars on the cover. The only time I ever bought People magazines because it had, Carrie Fisher and Darth Vader on the cover. Rolling Stone, I still have this collection of magazines that have Star Wars covers. So I'm guilty of this as well. And that's what it is. You go by the magazine stand and something catches your eye. It's like, oh, it's it's the essential guide to X-Files, and I'm an X-Files fan. So, I get the marketing. It's just a shame that this is what magazines have come to, is, printing endless bunches of specials. Now, that's not my pet peeve, because like I said, I understand it. Magazine publishers are trying to survive. What I don't understand is, of course, amongst the pop icons presented in these specials, you're going to have comic book characters. And you see them all the time. I just recently saw this Life Superman guide. DC's had their characters featured, Marvel's had their characters featured, and apparently they sell because they continue doing them. But there's something missing in these things. They review their history of the character. They review, the movie appearances and TV appearances and some background on the original creators and everything else. But what these things miss, and these are like 64 to 80 page magazines. What's missing from every single one of them is comics. Now, a lot of times these are published by the parent company that owns the comic book company. And so they're going to be able to use all this imagery without paying anybody anything because they own the imagery, because they are the parent company. There's no copyright issues for these publishers. But you would think someone at Marvel or DC would go, hey, why not throw some some comics in here, just a short comic book story. In fact, why don't we create a special comic book story just for this magazine, maybe a 5 to 8 page story, and we'll put our best writers and our best artists on it and really try to make an impression so that somebody picking up this Superman magazine to read about Christopher Reeve will be exposed to some really awesome comic book material. And maybe, just maybe, they might want to read more comics. They might seek out more Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or Black Panther or whatever the magazine's main feature was. And you would think that they would do that, but they never do. They have these specials about comic book characters in which no comics appear. And that's like really, really sad because the model of success is there. Back in the 90s, it was a magazine publisher who was publishing magazines for kids. And they had Barbie and Barney the dinosaur and, whatever. This, that, and the other thing. And they published a Spider-Man magazine and they published a Superman and Batman magazine, largely based on the animated stuff. Now, DC Comics provided them brand new comic book material for the Superman and Batman books. And it was top drawer stuff. Mostly Ty Templeton created a lot of it. And it was really fun stories. We would get these in our comp packs when I worked at DC. And I always enjoyed getting this magazine because the comics would be really fun. They'd be funny or compelling adventure. Ty and the other creators working on these were doing an awesome job. And over at Marvel, they had a Spider-Man magazine, much the same. Now, I don't know if they created new material for the Spider-Man magazine, but I do know DC created new material for the Batman and Superman magazine. And consequently, the Batman and Superman magazine sold 500,000 copies a month, which was more than any monthly comic at DC was selling. So they were reaching an audience with that magazine that they weren't reaching with their own comics, simply because of where it was racked, simply because the magazine was appearing in venues where there were no comics. So, so this was like a great outreach to get new fans. Now, Marvel ended up buying this magazine company. DC pulled Batman Superman magazine from the roster because they didn't want Marvel distributing DC material, which to me seemed kind of silly. You're making the same money. Who cares who distributed it? I mean, Marvel initially was distributed by DC. So this is the shoe on the other foot. So they just canceled the magazine. And Ty Templeton told me, I've told the story before, I'll make it brief. Ty Templeton told me that he went to the people at DC, the powers that be, and said, well, let's continue doing the magazines. 500,000 copies a month. Let's continue doing it. And the powers that be said, well, we don't have anybody in-house that can do that. And his answer was, for 500,000 copies a month, you think you could hire someone to put this magazine together? He says, and Ty volunteered to put it together. He volunteered to be the editor and help hire people to create the content, create a lot of the content himself. He was really avid about keeping this magazine alive, but DC didn't want to hear of it. And so they lost all of that potential exposure and money, because at $500,000, instead of getting a licensing fee, they would have gotten a piece of that retail price at the stands. So it's a shame, because the selling point of these magazines was this, all new material. So if you promoted it right, a lot of comic fans would have wanted to buy this magazine as well. You could have increased sales by distributing through the direct market as well as on the newsstand. You could have turned this into a hit. If anything, have the bragging rights of saying this is the highest selling of these kind of magazines. We beat Marvel at their own game. And again, when you have an opportunity like they did with the Superman Spider-Man crossover, like I discussed recently, you put your best foot forward. You put your best work. You got a chance to reach a larger audience. You're going to grab that every single time. On a similar note, you may remember Disney Adventures. It would be on the impulse rack next to the Archie comics at the supermarket. And Disney Adventures sold 1 million copies a month. And they always had comics in them. Now, Disney did nothing to exploit this. They didn't, do much in the way of a comic book line, but they did include comics. They didn't understand that kids like to read comics, and they would include them. And they did very well. The only reason that Disney stopped doing it is because Disney's run by morons, and they weren't happy with just 1 million circulation a month. So they pulled the plug on it. They thought that I don't know how, I guess they thought they wanted 5 million, or somehow it was an insult to Disney. But at 1 million a month, the only way forward is up. I mean, you could increase your distribution, all kinds of things. But, Disney, it's a success doesn't come easy to Disney. They just abandon stuff instead of actually having to do their jobs. Hey, if you need to reach me, help me do my job, you can reach me at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. That is the most reliable way to reach me. And hey, this offer still stands. It's not going to stand forever. If you go to Subscribestar, Chuck Dixon, and you join at the $5 level, you'll get a free, this first issue, European album-sized issue of My Sister Suprema. We're calling it the Origin issue. It's a 48-page, oversized, paperback, and featuring the fabulous art of Anthony Gonzalez Clark. And it is the beginning of the My Sister Suprema story in print, with additional art and revised art by Anthony. And $5 at the $5 level at Subscribe Star, Chuck Dixon. This can be yours. So that's it for me this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And I'll see every single one of you, I hope, down the road.